Hello, everyone. We're going to be beginning our parallel session number 3 very shortly. If everyone could please take their seats. In just a couple minutes, we will be starting. Thank you.
It's a big room, and we are live. Thanks, Damien. Super.
Let's go. Right. I think we are ready to start. For our parallel session number 3, we have the session titled Responsible Use of AI in Armed Conflict, Upholding Respect for International Law. This session is co-organized by the Harvard Law School's program on international law and armed conflict, and also by the government of Switzerland. We will examine how international humanitarian law applies to the development and use of artificial intelligence in armed conflict. Building on the outcomes of recent responsible military AI summits, we will focus on the implementation challenges across different AI-enabled military applications, such as targeting, intelligence, cyber operations, and humanitarian action. To moderate this panel, we are lucky enough to have Michael Siegrist with us. Michael serves as a legal officer within the International Humanitarian Law and International Criminal Justice section at the Swiss Federal Department of Foreign Affairs and specializes in humanitarian law and emerging technologies. His work as an international lawyer focuses on the application of international humanitarian law to artificial intelligence, cyber operations, and autonomous weapons. Let's give them a warm welcome on stage. And Michael, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Alba.
By warm welcome, I meant applause. They deserve one. Thank you.
Thank you, Alba. So yes, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this session on responsible use of AI in armed conflict, upholding respect of international law. It's really a great pleasure to be co-hosting this discussion together with Harvard Law School's program on international law and armed conflict, PILAC. AI promises to support a wide range of military tasks and activities during armed conflicts. Such applications can range from systems supporting logistical decisions, situational awareness and reconnaissance, or be more directly linked to decisions that affect human beings or property. Each application raises distinct legal questions and may pose important challenges that must be addressed. The discussions at all REAIM summits have underlined that compliance with international law, especially international humanitarian law, is a core requirement for the responsible use of AI in the military domain. Switzerland has long championed the development of clear, pragmatic guidance on the development and responsible use of AI in the military domain, placing respect of international humanitarian law at the core of that effort. Embedding the legal rules and principles from the earliest stages of research and design and throughout the life cycle of AI system, and not just as an afterthought, is a cornerstone of Swiss policy on military AI. Yet, there are many questions about how this can be done best in practice remain unresolved and need further clarification. Therefore, I'm very pleased that we have the chance today to unpack some of these questions with our three distinguished experts. Please join me in welcoming, just to my left, Dr. Jessica Dorsey. She's an assistant professor of international law and co-director of the Realities of Algorithmic Warfare research platform at Utrecht University. She's also an expert and member of the Global Commission on Responsible AI in the Military Domain and an ambassador to the Responsible by Design initiative of Article 36 Legal, which aims to strengthen national legal review processes and promote IHL compliance throughout the life cycle of AI-based military technologies. In the middle, it's my pleasure to welcome Tabitha Bonney. She's a civilian senior lawyer at the Operational and International Law team in the UK Ministry of Defence's Central Legal Services. Tabitha provides operational legal advice, is the MOD's lead lawyer on a number of areas of international legal policy, and is the legal lead for emerging technologies, including AI. She chairs the Legal Profession National Security AI Legal Cell and sits as an advisor to the UK AI Centre of Excellence. Tabitha is a member of the UK's delegation to the UNGG on lethal autonomous weapon systems, as well as representing this issue in NATO. And then last and not least, Dustin Lewis. He's the research director for the Harvard Law School program on international law and armed conflict, and an associate senior researcher in the governance of artificial intelligence program at the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, SIPRI. Over the next 50 minutes, we will seek to clarify which AI systems raise relevant questions under international law applicable in armed conflicts. We will explore what IHL says about the assessment of information, human judgment, and decision-making. We will discuss prospects for enhancing respect for IHL and the protection of civilians by relying on AI. And we will outline concrete by-design measures that can help ensure compliance, transparency, and accountability. To get us started, I'd like to begin with a question for all of our speakers. Throughout this morning and the whole day, we've heard about the many ways in which AI can be applied in military domain and in armed conflicts. In your views, which current and future military AI applications in armed conflict deserve the most attention from a legal perspective, especially under IHL? Tabitha, maybe start with your view first.
Certainly, and may I thank the Swiss government and PILAC for organising this session and inviting me to speak, and just say that I will be speaking for myself, so any infelicities or mistakes are attributable only to me and not to the UK. So I think it's useful to just remember that IHL is a context-driven discipline. And so when we're thinking about what AI does and how it might be used, it's always very valuable to come back to this concept of exactly how AI might be applied in context. So what does it do? It automates, it computes, it generates things. And that is a capability that can be used differently across different uses in the military space. So these functionalities are then useful functionalities that can be deployed in the military domain. What we need to understand is what does AI, or what do these functionalities bring that is different to the technologies that we would otherwise encounter within the military domain. And this is the idea that AI has the capability of not just computing, but concluding, so it can answer a question. And that is something that you might consider is replicative of some sort of cognitive function. So AI is able to allow for automation. It can allow for the dull, the dirty, the dangerous tasks that might otherwise be served by military personnel to be concluded in a way that is the safer, and it frees up those sorts of taskings or those individuals for other taskings. But equally, it is something that applies in a relationship with military personnel in a different way to the technologies that we're used to. IHL itself is technology agnostic. It doesn't go into exactly how technologies need to be composed. So you need to think about how the legal framework would be applied to the technologies that you use. And therefore, it comes back to, well, what about this cognitive function is the thing that is going to mean that you have to think about the law and the relationship between the legal agents and the law differently. Legal agents in international law are the states, so it's the state that is given the obligation to respect international humanitarian law. The state is also given the obligation to ensure respect amongst its agents. So can AI be a legal agent? Well, a machine can't actually be a legal agent. It can't make a decision. So the relationship that this cognitive function introduces between the legal agent and the legal test is where this cognitive element of AI applies.
Jessica, would you like to share your views of which systems we should pay particular attention to?
Yeah, sure. And I'd also like to echo the thanks for the organization here and for the stage to have what I see as a very timely and important discussion. And just to dovetail on Tabitha's comments about the cognition, I think that's where the most acute legal challenges will arise when we're looking at how these systems are being integrated to shape cognition, especially in context of targeting operational decision-making and weapons employment. And these systems, what we're seeing is that they can affect both what decisions are made and then how those decisions are made. So let's start a bit with the targeting and the decision-making there. AI-enabled capabilities increasingly support target identification, classification, pattern of life analysis, collateral damage estimation, dynamic targeting, and time-sensitive strikes. And in so doing, speed and scale that are inherent to these systems fundamentally reshape decision-making. AI enables rapid processing of these massive data streams, but compresses the time for human deliberation, verification, and contextual judgment. And these are all crucial for legal compliance. We see this in the further integration of these AI-enabled decision support systems, where they're increasingly structuring information prioritization, risk scoring, and target recommendations and nominations. The concern is that this creates a decision-making architecture shift where humans may no longer form their own judgments, but instead validate algorithmically framed ones. And I think this raises very serious concerns about automation bias, de-skilling, over-reliance, and diffusion of responsibility, and all of these also affect compliance. We also see it within autonomous or semi-autonomous weapon functions, such as autonomous navigation, target tracking, and engagement decisions. These systems challenge traditional assumptions about human control, intent, foreseeability, accountability, and all of these are, of course, embedded and central to the law. So, to wrap up this first round of comments, I think the main legal challenge, of course, is not the autonomy in weapon systems per se, but it's the AI-driven cognitive delegation that's occurring in military decision-making processes. And IHL must be interpreted to ensure that human responsibility, context-appropriate human judgment and control, and civilian protection remain central, even as warfare becomes increasingly mediated by AI.
Thank you, Jessica. So that's conduct of hostilities and targeting. Dustin, would you like to complement and add on that?
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mikhail. Also, my thanks to the government of Switzerland for co-sponsoring this session, as well as to the organizers for accepting the session. That decision, from my perspective, reflects a shared recognition that international law, and especially international humanitarian law, needs to be central to discussions on the use of AI in the military context. And at PLAC, we're grateful for this opportunity to contribute to that discussion and with that commitment. And so seeking to build on what Tabitha and Jessica mentioned, I'm going to look at two other areas that are outside the conduct of hostilities, but also relate to potential reliance on AI in the context of armed conflict. So the first area I'll look at very briefly is detention. According to public reports, advanced algorithmic frameworks are being considered to support detention-related decisions, particularly to predict which actors might pose a security threat to the state across the life cycle of detention operations. There's been speculation, for example, that the Chinese and US armed forces are each developing criminal justice-inspired algorithms used in domestic contexts for potential use in armed conflict, including to help assess which people are dangerous, where to allocate patrols in an armed conflict, and whom to detain for how long and when to release them. And at least since 2018, again according to public reports, Israel has used large-scale data analysis of social media posts to generate predictive information about prospective assailants. And that analysis has been used to inform detention decisions. So one other area I wanted to highlight outside the conduct of hostilities, while of course recognizing the extreme importance of the use of weapons and the means and methods of warfare, but another area is humanitarian action. So here, AI methods are already being used in attempts to strengthen services and to protect civilians. The Danish Refugee Council has built models that can help forecast conflict-driven displacement, potentially months in advance, while still relying on community input because unprecedented surges remain algorithmically invisible so far. Further, during the Syrian conflict, a privately built early warning system used algorithmic filtering of aircraft signals to give civilians additional time, from seconds to minutes, to seek shelter. Satellite-based damage detection has helped identify civilian harm at scale in parts of Syria, Yemen, and Ukraine, where external teams could not reach those areas safely. In relation to Gaza, researchers have used nighttime lights data and high-resolution imagery to show where power collapsed and infrastructure failed, as a proxy for civilian distress when external access was not possible. But we've also seen AI techniques supporting humanitarian communication and protection. In some contexts, for instance, refugees and internally displaced persons can ask chatbots on WhatsApp where to find food, shelter, or legal help, and to receive answers instantly in their own language. In Ukraine, a humanitarian chatbot became a quasi-trusted guide, telling people fleeing fighting where support existed and where it didn't. And the ICRC has used AI-assisted photo and name matching to reconnect families separated by armed conflict, while ensuring that every match still entails a human decision. And more widely, humanitarian analysts are using AI methods to scan news, social media, and satellite feeds simultaneously, not necessarily to make specific decisions, but to help identify patterns that no human team could see without that assistance. And the reliance on these algorithmic and data-reliant technologies in these contexts, whether we call it AI, I know there's a lot of definitional aspects of AI, all raise very similar questions to the ones that my colleagues raised, and I'm happy to go through some of those questions as we think through this together.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to all of you. I think that it's really important for us to see that AI can be applied throughout military tasks and activities, but the questions really then differ for what use the AI is made. But one thread that runs through all of your comments is the link between cognition and decision-making. And for that, I would like to come back to you, Dustin. PLAC has been studying the requirement of cognitive agency in depth. Could you explain us what assumptions does IHL make about decision-making, information assessment, and the judgment by human actors?
So At PLAC, we have been exploring this question. It's more or less a conceptual framing that distinguishes, on one hand, natural intelligence, and on the other hand, artificial intelligence. And then that analysis feeds into the question about what assumptions are made in the legal system already about each kind of intelligence, natural and artificial. And so by natural intelligence here, I mean the cognitive and neural capacities of humans, including their abilities for abstract reasoning, problem solving, learning, and adapting to changing environments. So in a recent paper, a colleague and I reasoned that international humanitarian law does not regulate only outcomes, and instead also rests on certain assumptions about how decisions are made and by whom. We've sought to show how each IHL obligation requires that various cognitive tasks are executed. The basic argument involves two assertions. The first assertion is that the existing legal framework presupposes that only humans vested with legal capacity can administer the performance of IHL obligations. And the second assertion is that those humans, in doing so, must exercise what we have described as cognitive agency. But what exactly does that mean? Well, from what we can detect from our analysis, by cognitive agency, we mean a conscientious and intentional operation of mind by a human vested with legal authority, through which that person implements the execution of the cognitive tasks demanded by the IHL obligation. Now, that framing does not determine the extent to which AI may be relied on or not. Instead, it's meant to provide a conceptual vocabulary through which to understand and ultimately to interpret and implement IHL obligations. Now, if our reading is broadly accurate, it raises an important interpretive and implementation question for states and other stakeholders. That question is, to what extent may humans rely on AI to execute part or potentially all of a cognitive task that's entailed in an IHL obligation? And if so, under what circumstances and subject to what conditions? So I'll close with an example of an IHL obligation concerning proportionality in attack. Some aspects of the associated cognitive tasks are largely informational. Those include estimating likely incidental civilian harm from the potential attack. Other aspects, including determining whether that harm would be excessive in relation to the anticipated direct and concrete military advantage, involve normative legal judgment. From my perspective, it would be valuable for states and other stakeholders to articulate with much greater specificity how they understand the permissible role of AI across both kinds of cognitive tasks, as well as where reliance on AI must be bounded in order to preserve human legal agency and state responsibility.
Thank you, Dustin, for shedding some light on the requirement of human cognitive agency and the need to have more clarity on which cognitive tasks can be performed by an AI and which one should remain with a human decision. Let me turn to you, Tabitha. How, from your perspective, might increasing reliance on AI shape those assumptions in practice, and what do you observe?
Thank you. So I will start with one of the comments that Dustin made, which is this idea that IHL is not just about outcomes, it's about how decisions are made and by whom. And so, of course, we would frame that as well as it's not a discipline of just effect. It is a discipline of effect, among other things, but it's also a discipline of due diligence. And how that then due diligence is set in place across a military governance system. So we need to understand military governance in order to further interrogate the questions that you raise there. If we're thinking about, well, what permissible roles does AI place against the human, you also have to understand the respective roles that are placed by the legal agents within the system. Because, of course, military governance is by its nature highly regulated. Strategic command and control is set up to distribute responsibility and authorities and give effect of an overall strategic intent of the military campaign, for example. So this governance is built around itself, autonomous actors, in terms of the way in which various actors take on legal responsibility under that overall governance that is applied by under the rules of IHL. And so there is a structure to that, a coordinating and a grouping around the individual. And the state sets up not just the individual accountability, but also sets up the grouping and the manner in which legal responsibility is diffused across that grouping. And so we now have a system where, as part of that grouping, you have individuals who will not just be responsible for advising a centralized legal agent taking a particular decision under IHL, but you'll have individuals advising on the use of capabilities that seem to be providing a cognitive input, again, to that decision. And so it is a matter of seeing exactly what those systems set up and recognizing that the agents within those systems are not, in fact, the machines. So the challenge there, of course, is this concept of cognitive offloading that you mentioned. And this is that sometimes when a machine tells us to, we feel that the machine will in some way know better. So if you think about the traditional governance system whereby say a military commander is being advised by a group of individuals, there is, through training, through expectations, through an understanding of the roles that the different individuals play, there is a dialogue that happens. And is this something that is able to be replicated when we are speaking about inputs that are coming from machines? So as you say, within the targeting cycle, there is a possibility of using the compute functions that AI have to assess and provide certain types of information, like information about sort of patterns of life, collateral estimates, or what's the dispersal range of an explosive. Those things can be provided actually with a degree of better granularity potentially by a compute function, but they still need to be understood by a decision maker. And so that is where practically we need to set into place an understanding of what are the strengths of the decision maker and what they need to do, and what are the strengths and potentially the weaknesses or the shortcomings of the machine and the inputs, so whether those inputs are humans or whether those inputs are provided by compute and AI.
Thank you so much, and thank you for giving us an insight into how military command and responsibility can function and sort of put into a frame the use of AI, and also to remind us of the due diligence obligation you mentioned. And so you already have shown that there are some benefits of AI, and I would like to explore those challenges and opportunities in some more detail, even though that debate seems to be quite old already. Jessica, you noted also some challenges at the beginning in your mapping, especially with the fundamental principles of IHL. Could you please elaborate a little bit more on your concerns?
Yeah, sure, thank you. We're often in these circles and in these conversations trying to pinpoint what's new, what is it bringing up that isn't the same as what we've been wrestling with before. So here, what we're seeing again, as we've all noted, it's the reshaping of how decisions are made, and then residually, as a lawyer, looking at what that does to the interpretation of legal standards. So looking toward the principles, as you mentioned, of IHL, for me, some work that I've recently done is looking at how AI systems being integrated into ISR, targeting, threat assessment, how they're influencing, or what kind of influences might occur to the operators and to the commanders during this, and then how that has a knock-on effect about operationalizing the duty of constant care to protect civilians in these situations. In this context, reliance on AI may be shifting attention from the individual human decisions, as you highlight, to system performance, which may raise questions about, from where I'm sitting, my perspective is whether civilian protection is adequately considered in this life cycle approach in the system design at the data quality level, model validation, and human-machine interaction. Moving to precautions in attack, similarly, we're seeing that AI systems structure how that information can be filtered, prioritized, and presented. This can enhance data fusion and civilian harm mitigation in certain circumstances, but it can also narrow situational awareness, reduce space for critical questioning, and compress decision-making in ways that undermine precautionary judgment. And this is the analogy I often use, is it allows us now just to look at the world through a straw. It narrows our field of vision, which may raise a number of questions about compliance. To complement Dustin's approach looking at proportionality, this is also a particular concern because the assessments necessary for undertaking a proportionality assessment, it requires context-appropriate, qualitative, and value-laden judgments. AI-driven quantitative models, the risk is that they oversimplify the concept of civilian harm. They can mask uncertainty in so doing, and then they create this narrative of false precision. And this potentially has the effect of legitimizing harm through numbers or metrics rather than meaningful normative evaluation. Some of my work is currently exploring how this speed and scale tensions enabled by AI risk reshaping how operators understand concepts of feasibility or the reasonableness of commander judgment. And one worry I have is that some may argue that real-time AI-driven operations limit the ability to take precautionary measures. It's no longer feasible to take these measures because we're operating at such a high tempo, or to carry out full proportionality assessments. But I want to take a moment to pause while I have you as a captive audience to remind ourselves that speed is a design choice, not a legal justification. Systems should be built to support feasible compliance with IHL rather than redefining feasibility around technological tempo. And to the point of cognitive offloading, I'm very interested in exploring how this may lead to that de-skilling and at what points within a decision-making cycle this is happening over time. Is it weakening operators' capacity to question outputs, detect anomalies, or apply contextual reasoning, which is required by IHL? In complex civilian environments, for example, urban warfare, this erosion of human judgment and control directly undermines the principles and rules of IHL. And I think all of this together, looking at piecing this all together, these dynamics risk gradually hollowing out that human accountability that you've highlighted, Dustin, even where humans formally remain, quote, in the loop. Ensuring compliance and the legitimacy of operations, therefore, requires not only technical accuracy, but active legal, institutional, and technical safeguards against inappropriate cognitive delegation.
Thank you, Jessica, and for drawing our attention, for instance, that filtering and processing and prioritization of information might affect our assessments regarding precautions, and that obviously speed might play a big role in operational beneficial aspects, but also things that we need to consider, that how can we still ensure compliance with IHL. Tabitha, in your view, I would be curious, you mentioned already systems where AI can help digest a big load of data to get a better awareness of a situation. I'd be curious about your view on potentially beneficial aspects in the equation.
Sure. So just to pick up on your point about speed, Jessica, and just to bring it into the place of thinking about what the advantages might be, I agree with you. Speed is a design choice, and speed, it's also an assumption that we tend to apply that battlefields are all about increasing the pace. But actually, that's not what military campaigning is seeking to do. What military campaigning is seeking to do is to control and make sense of the battlefield. Sometimes speed might have advantages to that. But letting speed get away from you is actually not strategically advantageous to those who are seeking to control the battle space. So I think, picking up on this theme, that beyond this idea that we need to ensure that decision-making is not compromised, we can also think about how working with these systems might actually be beneficial for us in terms of that function of strategically setting ourselves to an advantage in the battle space, and that includes in terms of meeting our legal obligations. So, what systems can do, systems that exercise a cognitive function can do, is that they can allow the military to be positioned in a way that gives greater oversight of the battle space, greater oversight of the strategic advantages that they might be seeking to deploy in a manner, I would like to think, that is lawful in terms of their conduct of operations. It can also, we can see systems being ways of achieving greater precision and greater restraint if those systems are deployed in that way. And once again, if you go back to the idea that there is a systematization of the law when applied to the battlefield, if you have states adopting systems in a way that is there to provide suitable guardrails, such that it's providing guardrails to support commanders in the achievement of their functions on the battlefield, then these are ways that responsibly you can work alongside the strengths of the capabilities, whilst addressing some of the things that I'm hearing, which is actually quite a lot of the problem that we have, is the weaknesses of the people, the willingness of people to offload, of their cognitive offloading, the willingness of people to just take assumptions from machines that they wouldn't take from other people. And these are things that we naturally within the military would be seeking to train out of people as tendencies. And so I think that we really need to pay attention to those sorts of ideas when we're setting up the system, so that we are able to extract the best advantages in order to achieve the purpose, which I'm going to once again assume is lawful conduct of the hostilities and achievement of the battlefield objectives.
Thank you, Tabitha, and mentioning guardrails, and we will come back to guardrails just in a minute. Dustin, from your perspective, do you see other areas where the use of AI can be beneficial?
Yeah, so I think it's important to try to strike a careful balance here, as my colleagues are also trying to do, to identify what the potential advantages and disadvantages are, including with respect to upholding IHL. So, of course, we all have genuine interests, and I think in some contexts there's actually genuine promise in the idea that AI-driven processes might better support respect for IHL. Perhaps not least by strengthening that informational basis on which some legally mandated decisions are made. And not just in the conduct of hostilities, but as I also mentioned, deprivation of liberty or detention, but then also in humanitarian action and protection of civilians. So we've already talked about some of these examples with AI-assisted satellite imagery that can help identify damage and displacement, or models that can forecast conflict-driven movement, and tools that help humanitarian actors identify patterns and can help them pre-position supplies. So I think these applications can improve situational awareness, as we're talking about, and they can help decision makers understand risks, needs, and potential harm more comprehensively than unassisted human analysis, if used well and within certain bounds. So one potential approach to consider from a legal perspective perhaps is to permit conditional reliance on certain AI techniques in developing part of that informational basis for decision making, while preserving for humans the normative legal judgments that are baked into IHL obligations. So again, to reiterate, all IHL obligations entail their own specific set of cognitive tasks. Every IHL obligation does. Some of those tasks, as we mentioned, are largely informational, whether it's estimating civilian presence, anticipating displacement, modeling potential harm. And yet these others require legal and ethical judgment, as both Jessica and Tabitha were discussing. So it might be weighing competing considerations, interpreting standards like excessiveness or feasibility, and deciding on how an obligation is ultimately performed within that system of legal compliance, as Tabitha was mentioning. So preserving that distinction might help states and other stakeholders explore AI-enabled benefits without hollowing out that human cognitive agency that IHL arguably presupposes, as Jessica was mentioning. Yet, and I think this is very important to underline, at the same time, there is a condition of legality that should be taken into account. Where an AI-related technology is used by a party to an armed conflict in the performance of a binding IHL obligation, that conduct arguably must be capable of being attributed to one or more humans acting on behalf of the party. Because if reliance on AI becomes so extensive that no human decision maker can be said to have exercised a sufficiently intentional and conscientious operation of mind, there's a potential for a legal responsibility gap to emerge. And by that, I mean that in such a situation, conduct that's meant to be governed by IHL and to provide at least a minimum floor of protection would no longer be capable of being attributed to the party. And as a result, responsibility for a violation could not be implemented because a core link in the causal chain, namely attribution to the party, would be missing. Which brings me back to this key decision point for states and other stakeholders. What in practice constitutes a sufficient exercise of cognitive agency by a responsible human, given the capacities of AI, given the tempo and uncertainties of armed conflict, and the specific IHL obligation that might be at issue? This is not a question that can be answered by pointing only to heightened technological performance benchmarks, or by invoking quantified utilitarian claims of greater civilian protection alone. Those might be important to consider, but from my perspective, they're not sufficient. It is arguably a fundamental interpretive and governance choice that states and other stakeholders need to address directly if use of AI is to enhance civilian protection and humanitarian action without compromising the structure and the core principles of IHL.
Thank you, Dustin. And you already put the finger on a very important point, and that's what measures do we need to take to ensure compliance with IHL, to really enable the use of these technologies in a responsible way. And that's exactly also the aim why we are here at REAIM, where we want to identify concrete and practical and realistic steps to translate all these principles into an effective and tangible measure. And one central pillar of that is the promotion of a responsible by design approach. And in Switzerland's view, compliance with international law, and especially IHL, obviously lies at the heart of that and must be the foundation of such an approach. And there, I think, a lot of practical questions remain of how do we do that? Which measures and steps should we take to ensure a responsible international law compliant use of these technologies? Tabitha, you already mentioned some guardrails. Could you elaborate on what practical steps states can take to ensure AI uses align with international law? And perhaps also to respond to what Dustin alluded to, that how can we preserve legal agency and responsibility when AI systems are used to support or execute cognitive tasks rather than just information assessing?
Certainly. So I think we need to slightly unpick how accountability is worked through in IHL, because of course it is entirely right. It's absolutely central that if you are focusing on the legal agent, you need to think about how we then maintain the accountability, otherwise the system falls over. It is always the case that the state on, or the state, particularly the state on whom part conflict is conducted, is overall the accountable legal agent. And then there are some cases, but not all cases, where there is individual criminal responsibility. The state's obligation to ensure respect doesn't stop at individual criminal responsibility. And so you really need to think about how the state is then promulgating wider responsibility against that system that we've already mentioned, so that chain of decision making and the manner in which the legal decision is taken and informed by the automation or the cognitive agent, that is understood. But there is always a point of legal responsibility. Even, one would hope it's not just at the point of the state, but you can see in terms of the governance that is set into place how that then is manifested. That is obviously not then the end of the story, because it's all well and good for me to sit up here and say, well, you have to do things properly and make sure that you account for people within your system to make. But what does that actually mean? Well, that means understanding exactly what capabilities are doing what and how they are interacting with the legal agents. So it's setting a clear framework of performance. Now, in terms of some capabilities, we have legal touch points. So we have legal touch points in terms of Article 36 legal review. There are people who are responsible for conducting that on behalf of the state, and they will have a slightly different relationship with proper performance of their function, so that they understand how that capability is going to operate. There are ways in which you then you test, you evaluate, you verify exactly what levels of performance you're willing to accept in what circumstances against what use cases, and then there is the resultant fielding of technologies through the weaponeering processes, so making sure that there is a clear understanding of when certain things are available or useful, and also when they would not be the best option, and then the idea of training, and so training people in how to obtain the best effect out of the capability that they're using. Now, that training is, of course, going to need to be cognitive of what the capability is and how it performs. It doesn't necessarily need to understand exactly what the ones and zeros are in the algorithm. So there has to be a way now that when we're thinking about what this capability is offering, we can put into place some sort of steps that think about who is authorized to give a particular order, who is authorized to put a particular type of capability in the toolbox. We already have rules of engagement. We understand the concept of authorities being dispersed. We have weaponeering, so we understand positions about particular weapon use and when these things are appropriate and when they're not. And then we need to set into place those clear lines of accountability when we're bringing on board these new sorts of capabilities.
Thank you so much, Tabitha, and of reminding us that responsibility is not just state responsibility and individual criminal responsibility, but that there's a whole toolbox of measures that states have to take to ensure respect with IHL, and I think that's a really good one. We're slowly running out of time, but I still would like to come to you, Jessica, and come back to the responsible by design approach, and how can we include and build in legal considerations really from a very early stage on, and what does that mean for such an approach and for the whole life cycle of an AI system?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Excuse me, I completely underscore the need for training across all of this as well. So my comments do not exclude that. I think we need to be very granular about what we're training and what risks we're aware of, incorporating that in training to mitigate the risks. So just echoing those comments. But in a responsible by design approach, I think from where I'm sitting, it means embedding those legal and considering and embedding them where possible, the legal and the ethical safeguards way farther upstream, right? Instead of treating compliance as a final check before deployment. And this requires systematic integration of IHL considerations across that life cycle, as you mentioned. And I think to get more concrete about it, these legal review processes under Article 36, in a lot of ways, I think they need to go a bit beyond that to reflect how autonomous weapon systems, AI decision support systems actually function. Understanding that is crucial. That's part of that training element. But it also means moving beyond a narrow focus on hardware or discrete weapon effects and instead assessing system-wide interactions, including data inputs, model training, human-machine interfaces, operational concepts, and foreseeable patterns of use. These legal reviews should be iterative and continuous, accompanying systems through design, testing, validation, deployment, updating, and eventual decommissioning. This approach requires earlier engagements than perhaps we're accustomed to across the innovation pipeline, and I think this is something even further upstream, thinking about investors as an actor in this space, industry, designers. Legal and ethical constraints have to shape system architecture, right, at that investment or R&D stage, well before procurement. And I think this structured engagement with industry, with researchers, bringing awareness of the known unknowns, in a sense, right? This multidisciplinary approach requires conceptual clarity, understanding I'm using a term that perhaps you use in a very different way, setting that out at the beginning so we have a common place to start from. And again, because you're a captive audience and I have the privilege of being able to do this, I want to also make sure to remind states that you remain firmly in the driver's seat, right? Acquisition processes provide powerful leverage points. States should be requiring demonstrated legal compliance, transparency, auditability, and human control as preconditions for procurement. I echo my colleague, Dr. Damien Copeland, who's in this room as well. Make sure that law is baked in rather than bolted on, right? This means IHL compliance should be evidenced through documentation, testing, operational constraints, instead of assumed on the basis of technological claims. So all of this, the responsible by design approach that we've outlined also with our Global Commission on Re-AIM report recently, that's a starting point. It's not a finished checklist. I'm not sure we'll ever get to the point where we have a finished checklist. Wouldn't that be nice? But it helps ensure that accountability remains human, that legal standards are not reshaped by technological capabilities, and that AI-enabled systems reinforce instead of erode the protective mechanisms inherent to IHL.
Thank you so much. We are running out of time. I'll have to close this discussion now, but I really think that we had a great discussion. We had a not finished toolbox, that's for sure. We might never get the perfect list of what we need to do and when and how, but I think in just less than an hour, we have explored almost at light speed the vast and complex landscape of international law of armed conflicts and how it governs AI in the military domain. We just had a little peek on all the issues and some answers, and I'm sure we need more discussions. We need to go more into the detail, how we translate the principle that IHL applies. It needs to be respected, how we translate that to practical measures to ensure respect for IHL, for international law, by recognizing that a lot also depends on the context and the very application that we want to use it for. Our distinguished speakers have reminded us that IHL remains the guiding compass for every application of international law, of AI applications in international armed conflicts and non-international armed conflicts, and they have highlighted the indispensable role of the human judgment, and really provided us with some practical steps, how we can integrate IHL into a responsible by design approach at a very early stage and even earlier stages than we usually refer to, so going beyond the study even further back. We hope that this conversation has shed some light on the practical steps needed to align military AI with the rules and principles of IHL, and we encourage you to continue this dialogue among the legal, diplomatic, and defense communities, because this is really where we can come together and exchange on this and use initiatives like here and other multilateral initiatives to discuss further how we can promote respect of IHL. With that, I'd like to express my deepest gratitude to our excellent speakers for their outstanding contributions. Please join me in giving them a big round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That was a very interesting session. I think you've brought topics that are worth thinking about, at least tonight. And there is a saying in Spanish which goes, el camino se hace al andar. The path is made with the steps you take through your journey. The same way you can't just say, I'm responsible, but you have to take actual steps towards being responsible and compliant. So I think this was a perfect ending for our first day. And there's just a couple of things, very, very quick, I wanted to share with everyone. Number one being the outcome document of the summit, Pathways to Action, which is available online. So, of course, everyone, we encourage everyone to give it a read. My point number two is that now that conferences are done, the cocktail reception will be starting at 20 to 7. But tomorrow we start at 9, not 9:30. We start at 9 o'clock here in Palesco. And lastly, the last thing I wanted to say is ask everyone to join me in giving a round of applause to all the speakers that have been with us today. Thank you very much.